Hello, and welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Schmidt List. On today's show, I am talking to Heather Kelly, Manager of Employee Experience at Aeritae Consulting Group. Heather and I talk about what it takes to be an amazing manager. I hope you enjoy the conversation and stick around after the show for a few notes. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Kurt.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Your background is, we worked together you were a manager of many people. So tell me a little bit about how you got into the role of managing folks.
Well, I originally started as a manager of just a very small HR team. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a weird mix of roles. And through my involvement with working with the other managers in the company, I was promoted into a development manager role for the project management.
And so when you first started in that role of being a manager, what were some of the things that you did to kind of help get you up to speed about how to be a good manager and what the appropriate way of managing was? Because I myself have managed people in the past. I never went to management school, or I think there is a kind of a natural yearning to want to be really good at it, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's people that you're kind of in control of. So what were some of the things early on that you felt were really helpful for you when you first started in managing folks?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time before I started that position figuring out what my stance was. What is my role as their manager? What is my take on things? What do I know about what they do? How do I appreciate the work that is being done by that team? Mm-hmm. And really reflected on, okay, well, how can I affect them? How can I influence them? How can I motivate them? So it was a matter of, what do I know? What don't I know? How can I be vulnerable and also bring all of my strengths? So figuring out what those are first.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's what I did when I first took the position.
So early on, as you were saying, what you don't know, what were some of the things that surprised you the most when you first started managing people?
I knew from having my own managers that it was very important to manage to an individual. You really have to know each individual person. Everybody's motivated differently. Everybody's skill sets are different. Mm-hmm. But making sure that you are paying attention individually is a lot of work. Way more work than I would have ever guessed. Mm-hmm. And it's worth the investment. So making time for being individually focused, although so much work. A
lot of work.
Worth it in the long run.
Yeah. Well,
that's how you connect with people.
Let's talk tactically just for a second. If I'm a new manager and I'm listening to Heather and she's saying, get to know each person individually, like what are some ways that you do that? What, is it just I have a one-on-one or I do an annual review? Like how do you get to know that person in a way that's beneficial to them and to you?
Yeah. So my tactic with my first large team that I managed, it was a position that I had never done myself. So I approached those first one-on-ones by really just letting them tell me their history. What have you done? What are you good at? What do you want to do next? And then offering up, well, here are the things that I've done. Here are the things that I'm good at. And here's how I want to help you with that. So it's a matter of giving them a platform, a safe environment for sharing. And then also, aside from just one-on-ones, it's paying attention to what their interests are. Mm-hmm. How do they decorate their desk? What kind of pictures do they have up? What do they contribute on social media? That kind of thing.
So what you're suggesting is treating them like a person.
Yes, like a whole person.
Interesting approach.
Not just an employee.
Interesting approach, Heather. So with that, let's talk about different personalities, though. You've obviously managed a large team in the past. I think you had, up to 25 people you were managing at any given time, right, or more?
There was one time that I was managing almost 50 people.
There you go, yes.
But on average, yes, 25.
Yeah, and so upwards of 50 people, having that individual contact is difficult. difficult, let alone the different personalities and the tactics. I would imagine you'd have to switch tactics in your approaches on a daily basis, right? Because you might have a more extroverted person or more introverted person, right? Talk to me about, I think the extroverted person is probably a little easier to get to know because they're going to be more of an open book. But what are some things that have worked for you in the past if you've had an introverted person to actually get to know them when they might be kind of shy and don't want to really talk about themselves very much?
I think a lot of it has to do with making them feel safe. So it's a long game. It doesn't happen automatically.
Right.
But asking the right kind of questions, making sure that expectations are very clear, that's a given for any personality type. Start with clear expectations. I found that in some of those conversations with a more introverted or reserved or maybe management averse employees, meet them where they are. You got to match what they're putting down.
Right.
If they're reticent to share, bring an agenda. Make sure that they know that you're there for a purpose. They know what your intentions are, and then be very clear about what you need from them. Eventually, if they understand where you're coming from, it's much easier for them to kind of share back.
Early on in my career as a manager, there was many times where I'd walk in with no agenda and just sit there and stare at each other. And I think to your point, being that manager is kind of being that guiding light, if you will. Like, I'm going to help steer the conversation. Not that you're putting limits on it, but you're at least kind of setting it in motion.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If I'm listening to this podcast, I'm a new manager, and I think there is a chance that maybe I'm a bad manager. What are some of the warning signs I should be looking for if I'm not really knocking it out of the park? Maybe I'm doing okay, and maybe I'm just insecure, which is okay. I think it's good to make sure that you're checking yourself every once in a while, that you are doing the right thing. But what are some things that you can do to recognize that maybe I could be doing a better job? What are some of the warning signs?
I think a pretty clear one is, how much does your team want to share with you? How hard is it for you to get information that you need to do your job out of your team members? If they are reluctant to share, or if they're reluctant to seek you out and proactively share, that might be an indicator that you've got some growth to do.
Yeah, sure.
There's also the very obvious, more vulnerable approach about just asking for feedback. Making your management style an open book. I'll give you feedback, you give me feedback, we're both growing together. That can be a good way to get what you need out of them. But yeah, if your team members aren't sharing, they don't want to come to you, they're not seeking your advice or your help, those are all pretty clear indicators that you're probably not connecting.
Sure. And that could be anything from just a simple trust thing to maybe they're scared. Maybe they are worried that if they share too much, they'll get fired or something, right?
Or maybe they find your advice irrelevant. Maybe they don't think you know what you're talking about.
Aw.
That can happen too.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, those are difficult situations to dig yourself out of once you're in that spot, right?
Absolutely.
So with that, what are some things that you would suggest, again, going back to more tactical sort of approaches? Maybe I'm listening to Heather telling me this right now, and I feel like I'm kind of in that situation. What are some of the first steps I should do to start addressing that?
My first move would be to try and have some one-on-one connections, have some one-on-one conversations, make it about their performance first, make it about the productivity of the work itself, keep it nice and neutral, and then maybe get a little bit more personal from there,
Sure.
What will they share? What will they open up to? And then eventually, hopefully, they'll either find you more relevant, appreciate your feedback, appreciate that you are asking questions in the first place. Showing interest in their work will often make people want to share back.
Let's flip that question a bit, and let's talk about if I feel like I'm not connecting with my manager. I've talked with the other people on the team, but maybe some agree with me, maybe nobody agrees with me, and I feel like I've got a bad manager, for lack of a better word. What are some things I should be doing to rectify that situation? Obviously, I could quit, right?
Yeah. That's a pretty last resort. But
it should be, right?
Should be.
But let's say, no, I am getting value out of this job, but I'm just not connecting with my manager. what are some things I should be doing in order to build that relationship? If this person, they might be a bad manager, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying it's that you're suffering from the bad roommate syndrome, right?
Right.
But what are some things that they should do if they want to get more in touch with their manager to feel like they're being managed appropriately?
Yeah, I think if you're the employee in that situation, I think the first thing to do is make sure that you understand your manager's expectations. Maybe you're not connecting because you're off base on what they're looking for. Maybe those other team members that you've just checked in with and say that no, there's no problem with the manager. Maybe they all understand it a little bit better. So that would be my first step. From there, I think maybe getting advice from another department lead, maybe an HR representative. Just get some feedback on your interactions and your involvement. Any sort of introspection you can do, I think, can go a long way.
Right. One of the more difficult things that I've personally had to manage in the past is people who work remotely. And that happens more and more these days. It's, a lot of people work from home. A lot of people have teams in other countries, all of these different things. If I'm a manager and I'm working with remote staff, what are some ways that you found work really well? What are some things that don't work really well?
One thing that has to be put in place right away is just those clear expectations around the job, around communication. What is the frequency? When you do have one-on-one meetings, try to make them Skype or video calls. It's good to just see somebody's face. With technology these days, that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Also, there's tons and tons of chat tools that companies use now. Being available, or at least setting your status so people know when to find you or where to find you. Being as proactive and upfront as possible is helpful. I think for my remote staff, it was the most important to have regular set one-on-ones with agendas.
Right. Very important.
Both agenda items that I would bring, and then I would ask them to bring agenda items as well. So it was a very guided conversation. We made sure that we were touching on all the things that you might be able to just, walk by somebody's desk if you're in the same office. Kind of keep a running list that you can talk to that person about. It takes a lot more attention. Proactive, constant communication is always key.
Something you said in there when you talked about asking them to bring an agenda. I think one of the most difficult times I've had as a manager is when I'm trying to engage with somebody and I'm letting them know how they can engage with me, but they're just not doing it. They still might be very vocal people about what their opinions are, about how things should change or what should stay the same and all these things. And then you're asking them, like, here are some things you can do to help make that a thing, but they're not doing it. How do you get around that? I mean, how have you found in the past that that's worked for you to say, for lack of a better thing, help me help you?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, that was...
It seems silly, but it really happens. I mean, I've run into people before that are like, I want things to be like this. And I'd be like, cool, well, let's get together and let's talk about it. And you get together and it's just, there's no substance, right?
Absolutely. That happened quite a bit, actually. So I started asking, just point blank asking the question, do you need to vent or do you want to do something about it? Do you feel like you have the freedom to do something about it? With my support, with the support of these people around you, I think we can probably get something done. But do you want to? So we can create an action plan. We can create some sort of initiative. We can actually solve some problems here.
Yeah.
Or do you just want to vent to me? That's fine. You can have this space. But we're not going to do this more than once.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And again, like I've said it before in this podcast, it's, you're having those meetings. You're like, is there something actionable from this conversation, or should I leave here with an action item from you, or is this just, you need somebody to talk to?
Yeah. Yeah. And asking point blank, like, what do you expect me to do about it? And what can I expect you to do about it? Kind of giving them the power to take things into their own hands.
Yep.
Now, if they do that or not is up to them. It can be very frustrating if you've given them the opportunities over and over again and they still don't react or don't act. But I think that that can be a new conversation then.
Yes, exactly. Well, in a deliberate one, which I think is something that I found managers